In just 11 days, the Assad regime, which ruled Syria with an iron fist for over 50 years, collapsed under relentless advance of rebel forces. This marks the end of an era of tyranny and the beginning of a highly uncertain chapter in Syrian history. So, who led to this dramatic fall? What does it mean for Israel, the region, and the world at large? Shalom from Israel. I'm Hananya Naftali, and today I'm unpacking this event, its implications, and what comes next in the Middle East. Last night, Syrian rebels entered Damascus, capturing the city without resistance and taking over the presidential palace. This is just insane because Bashar al-Assad, the dictator who ruled Syria for 24 years, fled the city and reportedly the country as well. Rebel leaders declared Damascus free and announced the end of the Assad regime, ushering in what they claim will be a new era of peace and justice for Syria. After a brutal civil war that began in 2011 and claimed the lives of nearly 500,000 people in Syria, the rapid collapse of Assad forces is remarkable, especially because it took just about 11 days. For years, Assad clung to power with the backing of Iran and Russia, using unspeakable brutality to crush opposition. But this week, even his closest allies abandoned him, leaving him to face the inevitable alone. But before we continue, with the growing censorship in the media, we have to stay close, we have to stay together. So I'm asking you to please subscribe to my YouTube channel for more important updates. It's just one click for you, but it's a big act in the face of censorship. So what happens now? The rebels' declaration of freedom is just the beginning, because Syria is a country in ruins. You have to understand, millions have been displaced and the infrastructure is in shambles in Syria. While the rebels celebrate their victory, the question is, who will govern Syria? Will the country rebuild, or will it descend into anarchy? Because the rebel coalition that toppled the Assad regime is far from unified. It includes moderate groups with Western backing, also jihadists with links to, and factions supported by Turkey. Each group has its own vision for Syria's future, and these conflicting agendas could lead to infighting. Syria's chaos doesn't stay in Syria, it spreads. Rebel groups have already advanced close to the Golan Heights, raising concerns about potential spillover into Israel. The IDF has bolstered its forces in the area, positioning tanks and troops to secure the buffer zone. It also announced closed military zones near the border, and we are just going to see what this collapse in Syria is going to lead to, because they literally sit on our border in the north. Israel has no interest in intervening in Syria's internal conflicts, but it will not hesitate to act if our security is threatened, as we did in Lebanon and even in Iran. Reports say, listen carefully, that the Israeli Air Force targeted a Syrian chemicals weapons facility to prevent it from falling into rebels' hands. This wasn't just any facility. It was a regime-held site believed to store and potentially produce chemical agents, the same kind of weapons Assad had used in the past to gas his own people. Why did Israel take this extraordinary step? The answer is simple. We will not allow weapons of mass destruction to threaten Israel's future. Chemical weapons, by the way, in the hands of unpredictable jihadist groups, or even worse, Iranian operatives, pose an existential threat to Israel and the entire region. When you're surrounded by enemies who glorify martyrdom and dream of wiping you off the map, you can't take chances. You act. And as I said before, let me be clear. Chemical weapons in the Middle East are not just Israel's problem. They are a global threat, illegal. But once again, Israel is left to do the heavy lifting, as always. So you're welcome, world. I wouldn't be surprised if they launched a UN investigation into why did Israel do that. But let's talk about who are the rebels, because we touched a little bit about that and I want to expand. The rebel groups that toppled Assad are a mixed bag, because on one hand, there are moderate factions that have previously cooperated with Western powers, and Israel even facilitated humanitarian aid to Syrian civilians during that time. But on the other hand, there are jihadist groups that pose a serious threat to regional stability. Some of the rebels have good ties with the West and even positive memories of humanitarian aid provided through the Golan Heights. These groups could be potential partners for stabilizing Syria's southern regions, but others, like HTS, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, have ties to an extremist ideology that is incompatible with peace, let alone peace with Israel. This fragmented coalition is both an opportunity and a risk, because if moderate groups emerge as the dominant force, then there's hope for a more stable and less hostile Syria. But if the jihadist factions take control, we could be looking at another Islamist regime on Israel's doorstep, potentially worse than the Assad regime. And let's talk about the Iran connection, because Iran has been one of Assad's closest allies, using Syria as a bridge to arm Hezbollah in Lebanon and expand its influence in the Arab world. The main interest that Iran has in Syria is because it borders with Israel, and Iran doesn't have a border with Israel, so they are using Syria's border with Israel. The fall of Assad, however, is a massive blow to Iran's regional ambitions, because, in fact, leaked Iranian memos reveal that Tehran has already begun evacuating its personnel from Syria, signaling that even Iran sees the writing on the wall. This is a significant moment for Israel, because Iran's axis of resistance, which includes Hezbollah, Hamas, and other terror groups, is crumbling. Without Assad, Iran loses a key foothold in the region. This weakens Hezbollah, which relies on Syria for arms and logistical support, and reduces Iran's ability to project power near its Israel borders. In the past, for those that don't know, Israel has been striking Iranian smuggling routes, Iranian forces, Quds forces in Syria. They said, we're not going to let you do that. We don't care where you are not going to threaten Israel's future. But let's not celebrate too soon, guys, because the Iranian regime is like a cornered animal, dangerous and unpredictable. They may double down on their nuclear program or look for other ways to destabilize the region in their inner war, not just against Israel, but this is also a Sunni-Shia war. I'll talk about that in another video. But Israel must remain strong and prepared for any scenario as the one and only democracy, Jewish country in the Middle East. And to think, by the way, that the one man who started this whole recent chaos in the Middle East is no other than Yahya Sinwar, the former leader of Hamas, who led an invasion into Israel that led to a bigger war in Lebanon, which led to the elimination of Hezbollah's leader and its pretty much defeat, which led to the rebels finding a good timing to topple Assad. So instead of harming Israel, Sinwar ended up harming his allies in Tehran. Now, I want to shift to Turkey's role, because that is a very interesting take. Turkey's President Erdogan has been a wild card in the Syrian conflict, because at times he supported the rebel groups, at other times he sought to reconcile with Assad to secure Turkey's southern border and suppress Kurdish forces, which are a big pain for Erdogan. But now that Assad is gone, Erdogan sees an opportunity to expand Turkey's influence in northern Syria to achieve his interests. But let's not be naive. Erdogan's ambitions have little to do with peace and stability. His support for Islamist factions could further destabilize the region and pose new challenges for Israel. Now, to understand the significance of Assad's fall, we need to look at the history of his regime. The Assad family has ruled Syria since 1970, when Hafez al-Assad seized power in a military coup. Hafez's rule was marked by brutality, including the 1982 Hama massacre, where tens of thousands were killed to crush an Islamist uprising. When Hafez died in 2000, his son Bashar took over. Bashar, who was trained as an eye doctor, initially portrayed himself as a reformer. But any hopes of liberalization quickly faded because Bashar followed his father's footsteps, using violence and repression to maintain control. The Syrian civil war, which began as a peaceful protest movement in 2011, exposed the true nature of the Assad regime, because his use of chemical weapons, barrel bombs, and torture of his own people shocked the world. Yet for years, he survived with the backing of Iran and Russia. Without them, he would have collapsed years ago. They basically held his regime alive, and in return, he let them do whatever they wanted in Syria. The Bible reminds us in Proverbs chapter 16, verse 18, pride goes before destruction, and hasty spirit before a fall. Assad's arrogance and reliance on foreign powers have led to his downfall. This is a moment of justice for the Syrian people and a lesson for all oppressive regimes. But the Syrian civil war has been one of the most devastating conflicts in the 21st century. Listen, 500,000 people have been killed and millions more have been displaced. Entire cities have been reduced to rubble, and the scars of war will take generations to heal. Syria's Christian community, once a vibrant minority, has been decimated by the war. Many have fled the country, while those who remain face persecution from both Assad's forces and Islamist rebels. This is a tragic reminder of the Bible's prophecy that Christians would face trials in the end times. And some people ask about the Jewish community in Syria. So it's virtually non-existent. Most Jews left Syria decades ago due to persecution under Assad's father, Hafez. And the million-dollar question is, what is Israel's opportunity in all of this chaos on its northern border? The fall of Assad presents both risks and opportunities for Israel, because on the one hand, a weakened Iran and Hezbollah are good for our security, but on the other hand, the rise of jihadist factions in Syria could create new threats also. Now is the time for Israel to deepen its ties with moderate Arab states, including those in the Abraham Accords. Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and Bahrain share our interest in countering Iran and promoting stability in the region. By working together, we could build a stronger Middle East. Israel must also continue to enforce its red lines in Syria. This includes preventing the transfer of advanced weapons to Hezbollah, stopping Iran from establishing military bases near our border, and ensuring that chemical weapons do not fall into the wrong hands. I said it before, but it's just amazing how in Isaiah 17 verse 1, it says, "Behold, Damascus will cease to be a city and will become a heap of ruins." While Damascus hasn't been physically destroyed, the fall of Assad's regime feels like a fulfillment of this prophecy. The fall of Assad marks the end of an era for Syria, and I don't know if a new beginning for the Middle East, but definitely a new chapter. No one can tell how will the leaders of the rebel groups in Syria are going to shape the country. But for Israel, it's an opportunity to strengthen our position and weaken our enemies. But it's also a reminder to stay strong. And finally, if you guys want to support Israel, stand against the rising anti-Israel hate, then visit theisraelstore.com. Every purchase helps fight back. Thank you so much for watching. And remember, God is in control, even in the chaos. Shalom.